Psychology of Gen X, raised without anyone watching. If you grew up in the 70s or 80s, chances are you came home to an empty house. No one asked how your day was. Nobody was waiting at the door. You just figured it out because that was simply how things worked. This is the psychology of Gen X. Born between 1965 and 1980, they were called the Latchkey generation. Both parents working full-time jobs to keep the household afloat. No supervision after school, no cell phones to check in with, no one tracking where they were or when they'd be back. Just a key on a string, a locked door, and silence waiting for them on the other side. And somehow that shaped everything. Not through trauma in the way we usually think of it, not through yelling or violence, through absence. Through the quiet kind of neglect nobody ever names, because on paper, nothing bad was technically happening. So they adapted. They had to. There was no other option. And that adaptation, formed at 7, 8, 9 years old, never really stopped. It just got quieter and more invisible as they grew older. Fast forward 40 years, that same person now avoids asking for help in almost every area of life. Struggles to rely on anyone but themselves, even when they're exhausted, even when they're struggling. And they call it independence, because that word feels safer than the truth underneath it. But is it really independence? Or is it something else entirely, something that only looks like strength from the outside? Let's go back to that empty house for a second and really sit inside it. 3:30 in the afternoon. School's out. Everyone else has somewhere to be, someone waiting for them. He walks home, alone, like always, the key around his neck, cold against his skin, swinging with every step. He lets himself in, locks the door behind him, because that's the rule, even though there's no one there to enforce it. Turns on the TV, not really for the show, for the noise, for a voice, any voice, to fill a house that otherwise feels too big and too quiet for one small kid. He makes his own dinner most nights, cereal, toast, whatever's easiest to reach, whatever doesn't require the stove he's not supposed to touch alone. No one checks his homework. No one asks if he's scared of the dark once the sun goes down. He just learns quietly to sleep with the light on and never mentions it to anyone. Around 8 p.m., the door finally opens. His parents walk in exhausted from work, carrying bags and stress in a day that drained them completely. There's no energy left for questions, no bandwidth for, "How was your day?" Just a quiet dinner. Maybe the news playing in the background to fill the silence between them. He learns not to bring up his problems, not because anyone told him to stay quiet, but because he can feel, even as a child, that there's simply nowhere for those problems to land. So he stops mentioning them altogether. A skinned knee, a mean comment at school, a fear he can't name, all of it just gets folded up and put away. Now let's pause here and look at what's actually happening underneath the surface. This isn't neglect in the dramatic sense we're used to hearing about. No one was cruel. No one was screaming or absent by choice. It was just absence born out of circumstance. Two exhausted adults doing their best with no roadmap and no support system of their own. Psychologists call this benign neglect. Not abusive. Just underattended day after day in ways too small to point to individually. And here's the important part. The developing brain doesn't need trauma in the dramatic sense to adapt permanently. It just needs consistency to learn from, and this was consistent. And what Gen X kids learned, over and over, without anyone ever saying it out loud, was this single quiet rule. Don't expect anyone to be there. Handle it yourself because you're the only one who reliably will. That lesson didn't stay in childhood. It became the operating system running quietly underneath every adult decision that followed. Self-reliance became identity, not just a skill. Needing help became a kind of private shame, something to hide rather than express. And that shame, formed decades ago in an empty kitchen, is still running the show today. Here's the deeper truth most people completely miss. Independence and avoidance can look absolutely identical from the outside. One comes from genuine strength and choice. The other comes from a much older fear, the fear of being let down again, the way they quietly were, over and over as a child. And most Gen X kids were never taught, by anyone, how to tell the difference between the two. Think about how this plays out in real life today. He's 52 now, runs his own small business from the ground up. Employees say he's the single most reliable person they've ever worked with. He's never once called in sick, never missed a deadline. But at home, his wife tells a very different story. She says he never asked for help, not even when he's clearly struggling. He didn't tell her about his back pain for 6 months, quietly grinding through it alone. He didn't want to be a burden, a word he uses constantly without realizing where it came from. Sound familiar? Here's another example from a different generation of the same story. A woman, 48, describes her own mother. She's impossible to help, she says. Even now at 78, she won't let anyone assist her. She'd genuinely rather fall on the stairs than admit out loud that she needs a hand. That's not stubbornness, even though it looks exactly like stubbornness from across the room. That's a 50-year-old survival skill, still doing its job long after the danger has passed. Even therapists confirm this pattern again and again in their offices. Gen X clients are consistently the hardest to get to genuinely open up. Not because they don't feel things deeply, they often feel everything, because feeling and showing it was never safe to display as a child. So instead, they built quiet, competent walls, brick by brick, instead of ever learning to simply ask for a hand. But here's the twist nobody sees coming. Gen X isn't broken. In many real ways, they're actually one of the most resilient generations alive today. That independence they were forced into as children? Somewhere along the way, it became their greatest strength as adults. They can fix almost anything without reading the instructions. They rarely panic in a genuine crisis. They've been quietly handling things alone since they were 9 years old, so very little rattles them now. But here's what many of them are finally learning. Later in life, often in therapy, often after a health scare or a marriage nearly falling apart, that asking for help was never actually weakness, no matter what that empty house taught them. It's actually what real connection was always meant to be, underneath everything else. The little boy with the key around his neck never wanted much. He just wanted someone to notice that he was capable and to be proud of that. Not that he had to be capable alone every single day with no one watching. And that same boy, now a grown man with gray in his hair, is finally, slowly being allowed to rest. He doesn't have to carry it all alone anymore, even though every instinct in him still says otherwise. If you recognize yourself or your own parents somewhere in this video, please hear this clearly. It was never a character flaw. It was a survival strategy that worked exactly as it needed to, until the day it simply didn't need to anymore. You're allowed to put the key down now. You're allowed to ask for help, out loud, without shame attached to it. If this resonated with you in any way, let us know in the comments below. And subscribe for more psychology that actually makes real sense of your childhood.